really try not to take the underground, or tube, or subway, or whatever you want to call it. There's something about being trapped with thousands of people with no way out that I don't like. There are a lot of crazy people out there, as we know. And honestly, researching for this video really didn't change my mind. Enough from me though, let's dive in. Love ya. Before Jordan Neely became the center of one of New York City's most divisive subway cases, he was known for dancing. Wearing clothes inspired by Michael Jackson, Jordan performed in Times Square and across the subway system. He could moonwalk through a station, draw a crowd, and briefly transform an ordinary journey into a street performance. People who knew him described a naturally talented entertainer who wanted to connect with others. But behind those performances was a life shaped by an experience few children could process. Jordan was 14 when his mother was murdered by her partner. Her body was concealed inside a suitcase and abandoned beside a New York highway. Jordan was later required to testify about what had happened. Relatives said his mental health deteriorated after her death. He developed depression, post-traumatic stress, and schizophrenia, while periods in foster care added further instability.
They grew up together as foster brothers. To Larry Smith, Jordan Neely was his big brother, best friend, and mentor.
He would always tell me things that he would rather be alone than unhappy.
Smith describes tough times and being moved from home to home over 4 years.
4 years of betrayal, rejection, 4 years of nervousness, 4 years of abandonment, 4 years of pain.
Eventually, they both aged out of the foster care system. Smith and Neely both ended up homeless.
As Jordan grew older, his performances became less frequent, and his contact with homelessness, hospitals, and the criminal justice system became more common. New York outreach workers knew who he was. From 2019, Jordan appeared on an informal city list of homeless people considered most in need of intervention. Attempts were made to place him in permanent accommodation and treatment, but he repeatedly returned to the streets and subway system. On May 1, 2023, Jordan boarded a northbound F train in Manhattan. He was 30 years old, hungry and carrying little more than a muffin. Witnesses said he threw down his jacket and began shouting that he had no food or drink. He said he was tired, that he did not care about returning to jail, and that he was prepared to die. Passengers interpreted the outburst differently. Some said Jordan was frightening but had not physically attacked anyone. Others described him moving aggressively through the carriage, clenching his fists and coming close to people's faces. One mother placed herself and her young child behind a stroller because she feared he might approach them. Daniel Penny was traveling in the same carriage on his way to the gym. The 24-year-old had served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, where he had received training in physical restraint. As the train moved toward Broadway Lafayette Street, Penny approached Jordan from behind, wrapped an arm around his neck, and pulled him to the floor. 2 other passengers helped control Jordan's arms, while people called the police. Jordan struggled, kicked, and attempted to pull free. When the train reached the next station, riders held the doors open so officers could enter. The restraint continued. Video captured Penny holding Jordan for several minutes. Near the end, Jordan stopped making purposeful movements. One passenger warned that he could be dying and told Penny that he did not want to face a murder charge. Penny eventually released him and placed him on his side. He told people nearby that Jordan would be all right. When police arrived, Jordan had only a faint pulse. Officers administered first aid before paramedics transported him to hospital, but his time on this earth had ended. Penny told investigators that Jordan had threatened the passengers and that he had only intended to restrain him until help arrived. The medical examiner concluded that Jordan died because of compression to his neck. The case quickly became larger than the encounter itself. To Penny's supporters, he was a former Marine who had intervened when frightened passengers felt trapped. To his critics, he had continued using dangerous force against an unarmed man long after the immediate threat had passed. At trial, passengers confirmed that Jordan's behavior had terrified them. Prosecutors accepted that Penny's original intention may have been to protect others, but argued that the restraint became reckless once Jordan stopped moving. The defense maintained that Penny had never intended to seriously harm him and disputed that the hold alone caused his death. In December 2024, jurors failed to agree on a manslaughter charge. That charge was dismissed, and Penny was acquitted of criminally negligent homicide.
I was trying to keep him on the ground until the police came. I was praying that the police would come and take this situation over. I didn't want to be put in that situation, but I couldn't just sit still and let him carry out these threats.
He lived till 30 years old in New York, homeless. That's rare. Not a lot of people make it to 30 years old sleeping on a train car on a bridge. He helped me with my college application to get into my college, where I'm on my way to take my finals right now. Jordan never wanted money. Jordan wanted food. Jordan wanted resources. Jordan wanted a home.
The verdict ended the criminal case, but not the argument surrounding it. Jordan had been known to performers, outreach teams, hospitals, police, and the city's shelter system. His decline had unfolded publicly for years. His final moments, too, would unfold in a public space, with no chance for recourse. I would really like to hear your thoughts on this case, so please share them down below. Just after 7:30 on the morning of December the 22nd, 2024, an F train sat motionless at Coney Island's Stillwell Avenue station in Brooklyn. It was early on a Sunday and one carriage was almost empty. Inside, a woman appeared to be asleep. Her name was Debrina Kawam. She was 57 years old, originally from New Jersey, and had been staying in New York City's homeless shelter system for several months. To those who would soon see her, she was simply an unidentified woman, resting alone on a subway train, until, that is, another passenger approached her. There was no conversation and no visible argument. The man and the sleeping woman did not appear to know each other, and then came a moment of true horror. Without warning, he used a lighter to set her clothing alight. The material caught rapidly, and within seconds the situation was almost impossible to control. The man stepped off the train, but he did not run. Instead, he sat on a bench directly outside the carriage and watched. Video showed him remaining nearby as smoke filled the station. At one point, he appeared to use a shirt to fan the flames. Police officers working elsewhere in the station noticed the smoke and moved toward the train. A transit employee eventually used a fire extinguisher, but by the time the flames were brought under control, Debrina's time on this earth had ended. The man sitting nearby was captured clearly on police body cameras. The officers had unknowingly filmed the person they would soon be searching for, but he was not identified at the scene. He left and disappeared back into the subway system. Investigators circulated his image across the city. Several hours later, 3 high school students were traveling on another subway train when they recognized the face from the police photographs. They called 911. Officers stopped the train at Herald Square, kept the doors closed, and moved through the carriages until they found 33-year-old Sebastian Zapeta Khalil. A lighter was discovered in his possession. The arrest came roughly 6 hours after the attack, made possible by 3 teenagers who had paid attention to an image released that day. Zapeta Khalil was charged with murder and arson. He later pleaded not guilty. For Debrina, identification took much longer. The damage was so severe that investigators initially struggled to determine who she was. For 9 days, the woman at the center of the attack remained unnamed. Fingerprints, DNA work, and attempts to retrace her movements were used before police identified her on December 31st. While that process was still underway, false claims spread online. An invented name and an AI-generated portrait were circulated as though they showed the victim. The image had nothing to do with the woman on the train, yet it spread faster than the truth. When Debrina's real name was released, a clearer picture emerged. She had graduated from Passaic Valley Regional High School in 1985 and had previously lived in Toms River, New Jersey. Her final morning exposed several different failures at once. A vulnerable woman was attacked while sleeping in a public carriage. The suspected attacker remained close enough to be recorded by responding officers, yet left before anyone realized who he was. And before Debrina could even be identified, the internet had already created a false version of someone that didn't exist. And that's not to even mention the possible systemic failures that led to Debrina ending up on the street. The case became a symbol of public fear around the New York subway, and it's not hard to see why. On the evening of May 7, 2026, 76-year-old Ross Falzone walked north along 7th Avenue in Manhattan toward the 18th Street subway station. Ross had spent much of his working life helping other people. He was a retired special education teacher with an extensive academic background, including studies at Bloomsburg, Marywood, and Columbia University. He lived on the Upper West Side, enjoyed attending performances at the Lincoln Center, and was remembered by neighbors as a quiet, kind man. His sister, Donna, had recently traveled from Pennsylvania to celebrate her birthday with him. She was already planning her next visit. Ross reached the entrance to the station shortly after 9:30 p.m. and paused at the top of the stairs. Another man had been walking behind him. They did not know each other. They were perfect strangers. As Ross stood above the staircase, the man approached from behind and forcefully pushed him with both hands. Ross was thrown forward and fell head first down the stairs. People nearby called for help. When officers reached him, Ross was unconscious and unresponsive at the bottom of the staircase. He had suffered a serious brain injury, damage to his spine and fractured ribs. Paramedics transported him to Bellevue Hospital at around 10 p.m. His condition continued to deteriorate as bleeding inside his brain progressed. Shortly before 3 o'clock the following morning, Ross Falzone's time on this earth ended. The man accused of pushing him was identified as 32-year-old Ramel Burke, a former professional dancer who had once performed on Broadway in productions including King Kong. His path to the 18th Street station that evening had begun several hours earlier, outside a police building on East 51st Street. At approximately 3:30 that afternoon, officers encountered Burke, behaving erratically near the 17th Precinct station house. He reportedly removed a stick from a pile of rubbish and approached them while holding it. One officer managed to calm the situation and persuaded him to drop the object. Rather than arrest Burke, police transported him directly to Bellevue Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. He arrived at approximately 3:39 p.m. A little over an hour later, Burke was released. Approximately 5 hours after leaving the hospital, surveillance cameras recorded the apparently unprovoked encounter with Ross at the subway entrance. Burke was not located immediately. The following afternoon, officers found him back inside the subway system, standing on a northbound C&E train platform at Penn Station. He was taken into custody and charged with second-degree murder. The circumstances quickly raised a question, extending beyond what happened on the staircase. Burke had reportedly been arrested several times since February, including incidents involving an alleged attack on a Port Authority officer and the alleged assault of a stranger. At the time Ross was pushed, Burke was already on supervised release. More significantly, police officers had recognized that he appeared to be in crisis only hours earlier. They had personally transported him to a hospital equipped to evaluate psychiatric emergencies. Yet, he had returned to the streets that same afternoon. New York City ordered an investigation into how the evaluation and discharge had been handled. The review was intended to determine whether different steps could have prevented what followed. For Donna Falzone, those questions could not change the telephone call she received at 4 o'clock in the morning. She described Ross as physically frail, weighing less than 100 pounds, and incapable of hurting anyone. Within the space of just hours, Ross was inside the same hospital complex from which his attacker had recently been released. Just a quick one. For some reason, my videos are normally seen by just 1 to 2% of my subscribers. I actually don't know why. Regardless of the reasons, it's making it extremely challenging to keep this show on the road. And I promise I don't like to do this. It makes me feel like Oliver Twist or something. But please do consider becoming a channel member. There are currently 343 of you, and I'm aiming for the crazy goal of 1,000 by the end of 2026. You get things like early access to videos, our behind-the-scenes podcast, and of course my eternal gratitude. Thank you, and I love you all. Now, back to the video. For years, Anthony Griffin followed almost the same route through New York City. He would leave his apartment in Long Island City, walk to Vernon Boulevard, and take the number 7 train into Manhattan. At Grand Central, he transferred to the number 6 and continued north toward the Bronx neighborhood where he had grown up. Many passengers knew him as the man in robes, carrying a carved wooden staff. Griffin moved through train carriages, combining religious speeches with freestyle rap. To some, he was the Messiah. Years earlier, he had been a respected battle rapper known as Fox 5, performing in barbershops, community centers, and competitions across New York, Philadelphia, and New Jersey. Music had occupied him since childhood. He filled scraps of paper with lyrics and built a reputation for thinking quickly enough to answer opponents in real time. But in his 20s, he moved away from battle rap and deeper into religious study. He adopted the name Almighty Godflow and increasingly presented himself as a preacher. Over time, friends said he became more isolated. When Griffin's mother passed away from cancer in October 2021, his circumstances deteriorated. Her name had been on the lease of their Bronx apartment, and Griffin was forced to leave. By the following year, he had entered New York's shelter system. He continued performing on subway trains, sometimes mixing references to his mother, religion, and his own loneliness into the same freestyle. Eventually, he secured an apartment through the city's housing lottery and moved into a high-rise near the Queens waterfront. Residents remembered different versions of him. Some found him energetic and unpredictable. Others described a friendly neighbor who stopped to speak with dog owners and offered warm goodbyes when he believed he was moving away. On the morning of April 11, 2026, Griffin began his familiar journey. He boarded the number 7 train at Vernon Boulevard and traveled to Grand Central. But after arriving at the station, he stepped onto the platform, carrying a large bladed implement. An 84-year-old man was the first person attacked. Griffin struck him across the head and face before moving upstairs toward the platform serving the 4, 5, and 6 trains. There, a 65-year-old man suffered serious injuries to his head, including an open skull fracture. A 70-year-old woman was wounded across the shoulder. None of the 3 victims appeared to know Griffin or one another. They had simply crossed his path inside one of the busiest transportation hubs in the United States. A commuter found 2 transit detectives and directed them toward the platform. As the officers approached the stairs, they encountered one of the injured passengers moving away from the scene. Then they saw Griffin. He stood holding the implement above his shoulder. The officers immediately ordered him to put it down. He refused and retreated toward the platform. The detectives followed but continued trying to end the encounter without further force. Their body-worn cameras recorded them, repeatedly telling Griffin that nobody wanted to hurt him and that they could get him help. More than 20 commands were given. Griffin shouted that he did not want to be there and told the officers to fire. As they pleaded with him to stop, he raised the weapon and declared that he was Lucifer. He then advanced toward them. One detective fired twice. Griffin fell and both officers immediately attempted to save his life. He was transported to Bellevue Hospital, where his time on this earth ended. All 3 passengers survived. For Griffin's family and childhood friends, the final words captured at Grand Central were especially difficult to understand. They remembered a man who had spent years describing himself as deeply religious, even divine. One cousin could not reconcile that person with the figure on the platform, claiming to be Lucifer. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.